I was never the type of person that set out to be an entrepreneur and wanted to do my own thing. You know, for a long time, I was very happy to have a desk and a phone and an existing structure within which to build my practice, which I did for some time. Just one of those things, you're looking forward to the rest of the time that you see yourself working. And then, I have 2 young kids and just all of life's priorities. And you look at the big picture, and I've talked about it with my husband, and he was very encouraging. He was like, as you mentioned, coming out of the pandemic, he was like, now is the time when people are doing things like this. And if you think that you want to, you should,
Yeah.
And so that was the push that I needed.
Awesome.
And there I went.
Welcome to City on a Hill. I'm your host, Whitney Mendoza, and today I am joined by Michelle Miller. She is a workplace injury consultant, and before you click off and you're like, oh no, that's what they're talking about today, only a little bit, because we're going to dive a little bit deeper into Michelle's background, which is very interesting. She works for herself, and I always love diving into that and how that works. I love talking with other business owners, so stay tuned. We promise not to bore you.
I'll try my best. Thanks so much for having me today.
No, thank you for joining me. So do tell us, because first of all, even though, workers' comp and things like that aren't sexy, but it's like neither are taxes, but like you have to do them.
Very true.
And workers' comp you kind of have to have. So let's touch on that a little bit. Tell us what it is, why businesses need to have it.
Sure. Workers' compensation is a type of insurance, right, that businesses need to have to insure themselves when their employees have an on-the-job injury. And the requirements vary state to state. In Georgia, if you have 3 or more employees, you're required to have workers' comp insurance.
It's good to know.
Yep.
And can you tell us what that covers as far as the basics, right? Because I know a lot of people are probably like, what we do isn't really that dangerous, but there's a lot that can happen on the job.
Sure. Yeah. Even if you are talking about a job that doesn't seem inherently dangerous, I mean, there can be an on-the-job claim for carpal tunnel syndrome that you've gotten from just typing on your computer all day. I mean, it doesn't have to be a construction job or something like that in order for on-the-job injuries to happen.
Sure. Okay. So we've gotten the non-sexy part out of the way. But I loved, because I didn't know this about you, but you were saying you actually practiced law in workplace injuries.
Yep.
And you how long did you do that?
For 14 years.
Okay.
Almost 14 years. Yep.
And then you were like, done with this, I want to work for myself. So tell us about that. Like what brought you to that decision and then the process to be able to do that?
Yeah. So I always wanted to be a lawyer. One of those annoying stories about the little kid that always said they were going to be a lawyer.
Yeah.
And graduated from law school and knew that I wanted to practice some type of litigation. The large majority of law is transactional. A very small percentage of it really is litigation. What you see on TV, going to court type of thing. And that's how I fell into workers' comp. People ask, did you always want to be a workers' comp lawyer? I'm like, no, I don't think there's anyone that always wanted to be a workers' comp lawyer.
Yeah.
I did want to litigate, and that's how I fell into workers' comp. And I practiced workers' comp law at the same firm for almost 14 years.
Okay.
Took the traditional track, work, made partner, like all of those things, and loved it. And I still love workers' comp. But over the last few years, I sort of was having the thoughts and feelings that I think a lot of people do. Is this what I want to do for the rest of my working days? And though I still really love workers' comp and obviously know it very well, I sort of wanted to get out of the traditional law practice. So I made the move into consulting, where I'm still able to help businesses mitigate their risk and control their workers' comp costs, but without having to spend the time answering discovery and getting bogged down in all of the other minutia that comes along with practicing law.
Nice.
Yeah.
So how long have you had your own, that you've just been a consultant?
Almost right at a year.
A year. Okay.
So it's very new. But
Ooh.
yeah.
So
same subject matter, new structure,
yeah.
sort of. Yep.
Well, because I think every year from like 2019 to 2023 has run together.
Yes, that's right.
Like,
that's right.
Where one thing began and the other ended. So we were can I say coming out of the pandemic again? I don't really know like what that is considered.
It's fine by me.
But you kind of started at what a lot of people would maybe consider like the modern day 2008, 2009. So what was that process for you of like, okay, I'm going to go off and do this on my own now?
Yeah, it felt like a huge leap. It still sort of does in a lot of ways. I was never the type of person that set out to be an entrepreneur and wanted to do my own thing. You know, for a long time, I was very happy to have a desk and a phone and an existing structure within which to build my practice, which I did for some time. Just one of those things, you're looking forward to the rest of the time that you see yourself working. And then, I have 2 young kids and just all of life's priorities. And you look at the big picture, and I talked about it with my husband, and he was very encouraging. He was like, as you mentioned, coming out of the pandemic, he was like, now is the time when people are doing things like this. And if you think that you want to, you should,
Yeah.
And so that was the push that I needed.
Awesome.
And there I went.
What do you think's been one of the biggest things that you've learned since leaping out and starting your own thing?
Biggest things. There's a lot. There are, there's
You're constantly learning.
Yes,
Same.
still.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and you constantly, one of the reasons I suspect people go out on their own largely is time freedom, right? You want to choose how you're using your time. If you want to do nothing all day long one day or something personal, you have that luxury. But at the same time, when you make those choices, you're still always feeling like that little bit of guilt creep in, like you should be doing something or there's something else that you need to be doing. So yeah, that's something that sticks out in my mind.
Yeah. Yeah. So how, I love that because I think I probably have that too.
Sure.
And part of that's just because there's pros and cons to everything, but just as a business owner, you are wearing multiple hats, right?
Sure.
Especially during your first year and figuring things out and worrying about things that you didn't necessarily have to worry about when you did work for someone. How do you manage to get it all done?
I probably don't, right? Does anyone get it all done? Just one of those things, work when you can. It's waking up early to get an hour in before I get my kids up and get them to school. And, when the house is quiet, right? Like 1 hour, I feel like that 5:30 to 6:30 or 7 is incomparable. Even if you had 3 hours at the end of the day, right? You can get so much more done in that first early quiet hour.
Absolutely.
And then, sometimes it's kids go to bed, sit in front of the computer for another couple hours and figure out a website issue or, one of those behind the scenes, also non-sexy things that you have to do yourself when you're on your own.
Yeah. So what, when a business comes to you for your service, what does that process look like?
Yeah. It can look one of several different ways. They can work with me on a one-time project-based structure, or more of an ongoing engagement. That can be, and as you might imagine, one often turns into the latter. On a one-time limited project situation, it would be, I would go into a company and look at the policies they have in place with respect to their on-the-job injury situations. What type of how much money they're spending with respect to their on-the-job injuries, where they're spending that money, and then sort of implement strategies to apply to reduce that spend. Write up a recommendation analysis for them. Here's a report, and that's the end of that engagement. Or, it can be on a monthly retainer with companies month to month where they can, engage with me as needed. A lot of the place where I'm finding the need for my services is companies that are more of the smaller and mid-sized market and don't want to expend the resources to have a workers' comp specialist as a full-time employee. They can engage with me on a limited basis just based on their need. Like, say we consult and figure out that they probably need someone for 8 hours a week. They can engage with me just for that limited amount of time, month to month, and that way they have the expertise to consult with, but they're not committing to all the things that go along with hiring a full-time employee, you know, the insurance and overhead and liability, all of that stuff.
Right.
So, yeah.
I love this theme too of that. Well, I was going to say you could quickly learn it. You probably do quickly learn it, but you can 100% resist it as a business owner. But that is tapping into the resources of others as business owners to allow them to do what they do best so you can do what you do best, right? So, I mean, same for us. If we were to walk through, I mean, there's probably a lot of risk in this one room of things that could fall or heavy equipment, right?
Sure.
But I would not be able to accurately analyze how great that thread is or how much that would cost us. And so you doing this for other businesses really helps put that forward for them, right? Like they're able to mitigate the risk without taking a guess, which I think is also very beneficial.
That's right. And what you're discussing primarily is the safety, and that is a big part of it. Mm-hmm. Also, on the other side, though, you know, you can reduce claims by, like you said, identifying hazards and doing safety training and things like that. But the other side of it is acknowledging that on-the-job injuries are going to happen at one point or another. And what can you implement at the company level to reduce the spend on those claims once the accidents do happen? So it's sort of a two-prong analysis. Yeah.
No, I love that. Again, that's just something that I think as business owners, we're so busy thinking about running the business that that's not something that we think about.
Well, it's just like anything in any other area of life, right? Like you almost don't know what you don't know. You don't even know to ask the questions or, you know, that you might need someone like me, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So what did it look like when you made that shift and you started working to tap into your network of like, hey, I'm doing this now, right? Because you do have to make that shift. Like, what was that process for you and just being able to get new clients and things like that and communicating to them that you were going on your own to do this consulting?
Yeah, it was interesting. And it's funny, too. I used to always say, you know, for almost a decade and a half, people would ask me what I did, and I could answer with one word, saying I'm a lawyer. You know, now it takes me a good 120 seconds to fully explain to people what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I'm fortunate, you know, I've built up a great network for many years within this same field. So I did and do continue to have a lot of people to reach out to talk about what I'm doing. And yeah, it's been great and continues to be, but it's definitely, it's different. But in a lot of ways also the same. I mean, that was one of the things I discussed with my husband when weighing the pros and cons about whether to do this, you know, and he sort of pointed out as a defense lawyer, I was still always constantly networking, you know, and working to get in more work and grow my book of business and that type of thing. And so he pointed out, you're sort of going to be doing more of the same thing, you know, it's just in a slightly different way and for yourself only and that type of thing. So in some ways it's the same, but also different in others.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you, is there something like a misconception that you had about running your own business that you learned that was not what you thought?
Oh gosh. Ask me again in another year. I'm sure. Yes. I'm sure there are many. It's a trip. It's been a lot of fun. And also scary some days. But yeah, I'll get back to you on that.
Well, I love that because you already had laid a lot of the footwork, right? That you were already involved in groups and networking and things like that, because I think that's such a big thing is that you can't wait till you decide you're going to do something to start trying to get the word out there.
Absolutely. That's something I always say I want to I mean, my kids are a little young now, but I want to instill in my kids from a young age is the importance of contacts and really maintaining those before you think you need them.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you say to the naysayers who are like, oh, I don't need that? Or, again, if they come up with like, well, we don't really do that much dangerous work around here. How do you combat that to kind of really get that business to see that actually, yeah, you really do need this?
And, that's common. I mean, it's hard a lot of the time to convince people why they need to spend money, right? Unless they're putting out a fire and they have to spend it at that exact moment. I just did a webinar the other day, was a guest on someone's webinar, and the title was Going Beyond Damage Control, which is what I really try to hammer home with people. You're going to pay less money ultimately if you pay at the outset to be prepared and put preventative measures in place rather than, the SHIT hits the fan and you're putting out fires. And, at the end of the day, if people resist and they don't want to spend the money, I don't push too hard. I'm like, that's fine. If you know where to find me if and when you figure out that you do want to look into this.
Sure.
And a lot of times, I mean, I'll talk to people for, a number of phone calls and for a decent length of time, before I really am going to push to engage with them. I mean, I don't need people to, start getting out their checkbook just to have a couple of phone calls with me. And so, those first few phone calls and really talking with people and educating them, I think does sort of make them come to their own realization as to why it's important.
Sure. For anyone who is looking to go out and start their own business, what would be your number one piece of sage advice for them?
At least in the very beginning, to come up with a schedule for yourself, for your days, at least a general framework, because I think it can be very easy to, sort of let yourself loose, and then maybe a couple of days go by and you're like, realizing that you're not as structured. I mean, particularly, if you've spent many years in a structured type workday environment, I imagine it can be pretty easy to sort of let a little bit too loose, maybe.
Yeah. Well, or almost, because there's that, or you can also swing to the other side, right? Like I'm thinking of you getting up earlier or working late. Like the beauty of that is you can make your own schedule, but you're right. If you don't set up some sort of goal for yourself, the day can just get away from you. And
totally
in both directions, either you've got nothing done or you don't know when to shut off and say, okay, it's 9:00. I should have really shut the laptop 3 hours ago.
I try to do it. I don't plan my schedule like weeks and months ahead of time, but every night I sort of try to loosely plan out my schedule for the next day, just so that I like have some guidance when I know what time I want to wake up, and I have some guidance as to how I want my day to go and what I want to accomplish, and sometimes you get to check off everything on your to-do list and more, and sometimes you might only check off one thing, but at least you have a general guide as to what your goals are for that day.
Sure. I love that. That's good advice. So for my last question that I always ask every guest, it's really this, the show is City on a Hill. What does that mean to you? What does it mean to be different? How do you feel like that gives you really a standout nature in what you do, right? Because I kind of think same thing. There's a million companies that do social media and content creation. Why would you pick us over anyone else? I mean, you could probably say the same of, okay, workers' comp, yeah, okay, I need to get this done, but I could pick anybody. But like, not really, right? There is something that makes you different. So what do you feel like that is for you?
That's a question. What immediately comes to mind is my connection to Georgia and to Atlanta. So, most people who live in Atlanta are transplants. I'm a third generation Atlantan, which is one of the facts that I say during an icebreaker or something to that effect when I'm called on. And so, I've always felt a real tie to the fifth city and to Georgia, and that's Delta Airlines and the Braves and Chick-fil-A and all the hometown pride, and I think that love for Georgia is one of the many things that drew me to, or led me to represent Georgia employers in workers' comp litigation, which, as we discussed, I did for many years, and then sort of led me to what I'm doing now. So it all ties together in that way. It's kind of nice to see it come full circle.
Absolutely. Well, and again, just being able to know, like you said, it varies by state, and so working with Georgia companies for as long as you have, I mean, you know your stuff and can answer their questions. So
I do. Yes. Awesome. Thank you.
If people want to get in contact with you, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah. I'm Michelle Miller. I'm on LinkedIn and fairly active. Also, my website is mcmworkplacesolutions.com. And the same email, michelle@mcmworkplacesolutions.com.
Awesome. Michelle, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And thank you all for listening. Until next time, we'll see you then.